Hey gamers, this is John. Today's episode is about the history of what was Final Fantasy Versus XIII, which later became Final Fantasy XV. Now, this game was announced 11 years ago until it changed its title at E3 2013, and of years of not being showed in many conventions like E3, Tokyo Game Show, and many more. A lot of fans of the franchise of Final Fantasy were waiting for this game to come since buying the PS3, and many were losing patience after years of being in the dark. But then their voices were heard in 2013 when the title changed into Final Fantasy XV. Let us begin the story of the cancelled title, which changed into the game we know as Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy Versus XIII is one of 3 games that was announced on E3 2006. The 2 games it came along with are Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy Type 0, then known as Agito 13. The 3 games formed the series known as Fabula Nova Crystallis, Latin for New Tale of the Crystals. It was planned for the PS3 and be a companion to both 13 and Type 0. The theme of Versus 13 was known as a fantasy based on reality, and the game was to take place in a world similar to contemporary Earth. However, 13 and Type 0 ended up having a series of their own. 13 had 2 sequels, 13-2 and Lightning Returns, which were released on PS3 and Xbox 360. While Type 0 had its game on the PSP and spawned novels and manga, Type 0 was later released on the PS4 in 2015 worldwide. After years of media silence and questions from gamers who were anticipating this game, at E3 the game was retitled and rebranded as Final Fantasy XV in 2013. The gameplay mechanics of Final Fantasy Versus XIII were similar to that of Square Enix's Kingdom Hearts, but it is unclear whether the game ever had a fully playable form, as the gameplay demonstrations appeared to be scripted and possibly existed in proof of concept stage. Noctis was shown wielding a myriad of weapons, teleporting, and even using a gun turret. Some footage showed blood spilling from enemies when stricken. The interface bore similarities to the menu system used in Kingdom Hearts. In addition to showing the common commands of attack, magic, and item, another option showed EXR, the X Hearts, assumed to be some kind of limit break system or series of special attacks, as shown in previous titles. Party members were to have their portraits in little bubbles on the screen that displayed their battle stats, and it was said that the player could switch between party members on a whim. Like Kingdom Hearts, the standard active party size as demonstrated in the trailer was 3 characters. Playing as different character, which is something that the main Final Fantasy XV game is lacking unless it's a DLC, meant that you had to adapt to their fighting styles, such as Gladiolus carrying heavy weapons and Prompto that was planned with a third-person aiming mode, allowing for targeting enemy weak points that could not be hit when playing as Noctis. Without Noctis, the party couldn't use magic, as the ability was said to be intertwined with the story elements, as powers were granted to those under the Regal Fellowship of the Crystal. The game was to be an action RPG, and the player was able to control vehicles and airship included, and the game was to be fully seamless with the world map. However, in Final Fantasy XV, Noctis and his friends travel the world in their car known as the Regalia. However, the Regalia can be modified into the Type D, which makes it look like a monster truck, and the Type F, which is obtained for fulfilling a side quest, is a car that can go from ground to an aerial vehicle, as shown during the trailer of Final Fantasy XV last year. While the characters are intact, their outfits have been redesigned shortly after Versus 13 was retitled into 15. However, before Luna Freya, the lead female was called Stella. However, they both shared similar designs in a way. Noctis was the main protagonist journeying with Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto in this one. However, it was still kept intact in the final game, FF15. Of course, the main party is still playable, but Core, who was supposed to be a 5th party member, was dropped in this one. The base story of the Kingdom of Lucis protecting the world's crystal was able to wield its power is still present. Noctis is an equivalent of the Warrior of Light, and he can see the Light of Souls when wielding the Ring of the Lucii. He still had a near-death experience in childhood, although it didn't grant him supernatural powers. Though the intended opening for Final Fantasy Versus XIII of Noctis meeting Stella at the treaty signing party was scrapped, the idea morphed into the film Kingsglaive Final Fantasy XV. Instead of Noctis meeting Stella before the painting of Etro, Nyx Ulrich meets Lunafreya in scene that pays homage to the opening of Versus XIII. As the treaty is to be signed, the white-clad Imperials and the black-clad Lucians draw their weapons upon one another in a scene reminiscent of a scene from Final Fantasy Versus XIII. A lot of the music composed for Final Fantasy Versus XIII is part of the 15 soundtrack, such as Somnus. The locales also appear similar, as a nighttime metropolis and a gas station on the desert were shown for Versus XIII, and similar locations remain in Final Fantasy XV. The female Dragoon from Versus XIII is introduced in the game as Aranea Highwind. The White Robe Man from the early Versus materials remain is in Final Fantasy XV as Ravis Nox Floret. The suit the king wore in the Versus trailers is still worn by the redesigned King Regis and Noctis himself as DLC for Final Fantasy XV. Noctis wears the suit he wore in the opening for Final Fantasy Versus XIII at the end of Final Fantasy XV. The character Gentiana and the dog Umbra were designed for Final Fantasy Versus XIII and remain for 15, albeit recast with new roles. There was going to be an Imperial General named Safai Roth, implied to originally being the main villain, as Arden Isunia was created after Roth was cut. Arden remains as the main villain for Final Fantasy XV, and the SAF text on Imperial dropships refers to Safai Roth, the character originally planned for Versus XIII. Noctis was able to teleport and forge crystalline weapons from thin air, and also to wield all of his weapons at once via magic. In Final Fantasy Versus XIII, Noctis was said to be able to see the life of expiring souls, and those with ability have gained power from the kingdom of the dead. This may have become the bonding of the souls concept for Final Fantasy XV, where Noctis can wield the combined powers of his forebearers. In the early Versus XIII trailers, Noctis' eyes were shown turning red. In Final Fantasy XV, this happens when he summons astrals like Ramu, Bahamut, Leviathan, and so on. In Final Fantasy XV, it uses the same logo with new colors. When a player completes the game, the logo changes to a new version. The game was first unveiled in 2006 at the E3 convention alongside Final Fantasy XIII and Type O, then known as Agito 13 at the time. These three games formed the Fabula Nova Crystallis. It was said to not be a direct sequel to 13, but an independent story unfolding in a different world with different characters, and also the theme of a fantasy based on reality. The director of the game was Tetsuya Nomura. Although he designed the characters as well, he was not the costume designer, as Square Enix signed a contract with Japanese fashion brand Rowan to promote their clothing designs in the game through different characters. Rowan creative director Himuro Takahata served as the game's costume designer, but before his designs were implemented, Noctis was shown wearing a placeholder attire designed by Nomura. In 2009, after a year of silence, the game was briefly shown at the Tokyo Game Show, although the gameplay footage was merely a demo as said by Nomura. A year later, Final Fantasy XIII was released and became a success, but due to technical issues, Versus 13 was almost brought to a halt. The reason of these issues is due to not working with the engine known as Crystal Tools, and instead they put themselves to use another engine called Luminous Engine, which was shown in the tech demo of Agni's philosophy. During an interview with Famitsu, Nomura wasn't sure if the game would show up at E3. In the 2010 E3 convention, the game did not show up. It didn't show up for 3 years at E3 or the Tokyo Game Show. However, rumors speculated from Kotaku that the game was cancelled in the summer of 2012. But then developers stated that the game was still in production and dismissed the rumors of being cancelled. Then finally, in 2013, at the E3 convention, a trailer was shown, and then at the end, the game was retitled as Final Fantasy XV, and it was said to be on a PlayStation 4. In 2015, the game was considered as part of the Fabula Nova Crystallis series, but then the game had distanced itself from the series. Its current connection, though, has been reduced to a thematic base upon which original lore has been built. During all these years of silence before its rebranding as 15, what other Square Enix titles have been released during these years? Well, Kingdom Hearts 2, 358, 2 Days, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and re-releases of classic titles on the Game Boy Advance, DS, and PSP, such as Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which were also released on mobile, tablets, and also PC. There were also titles that were released like Final Fantasy 12, 13, 13-2, Lightning Returns, The After Years, and a lot more as well. So finally, in conclusion, although 15 is a success, I just kind of hope that the thematics of Versus 13 were kept. A lot of them as well, because they seem that would have made the game so cool, such as Core being a playable party member. But although after 10 long years of development, I still like 15 a lot, even though it's no longer Versus 13, and some of the thematics that would have made the game very awesome were scrapped. But still, you can play as Gladio in a DLC as well as Prompto. I still remember in some ways how if Versus 13 was cancelled, then so would Kingdom Hearts 3, but thankfully, they're not. So, if you have anything to say about this, please comment, subscribe, share with your friends, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and support me on Patreon. Until next time, gamers, this is John, host of Video Games in the World. Have a good one. Bye-bye.